Oh dear. Carla, it's so good to see you today. It's just lovely.
Thank you.
I met Carla when I was traveling in Greece, and it was a surprise meeting. It wasn't intended, but we had a few minutes together and started to talk
Yes.
and found out we had, in a way, similar reasons for being there. But mine is as a lay person interested in history, and Carla is a scholar. Carla teaches at several universities in Toronto, and her focus was Artemis and looking at some ancient sites. There's a copy of her recent book here, which is available on Amazon, and you'll find notes about her website link and the book in the just below the Zoom call. So check that out, or below the link. So Carla, it's so good to talk to you.
So good to be here, and I'm so glad that we're finally doing this.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about doing this interview for a little bit, and so I'm glad that we can share some of our thoughts and some of our conversations with everyone else.
Yeah, I got so excited when I found out that you really have a calling to the goddess Artemis, don't you?
Yes.
And I think I hadn't isolated how important she was or how unique she was. So what brought you to her?
So I'm leaning more into that word calling lately. At least in the last year or so since the book was published, I'm leaning more into the spiritual side. I think I've always known that it was a calling, but I kind of pushed it to the side, even in moments where she was really in my face kind of thing. Like, do you see me? I am here. And so I remember actually, sorry to digress, but I remember one time in university, I was talking about my project to someone. And I was talking about how much I enjoy it, and how naturally she comes to me, and how much I like writing about her. And they said to me at that time, hold on to that. Don't lose that. And I kind of thought, it's research. But now, as I just remembered it now as we're talking, it was almost like that person was saying to me, this is something that doesn't happen all the time, and it's special. And so I think, to go back to your question of how I got started, in university, I did a lot of, and I came across Artemis. I had not heard of her too much. I knew who she was, and I started looking her up, and there was just a connection.
And that was your PhD direction, wasn't it?
That was when I applied for my graduate study. I applied for my master's. I did a very short paper on her in Ephesus. And it was then that I realized, wait, there's a lot about her that people don't know. And so then my mentor had said to me, well, this looks like you might want to spend more time on it. And so I applied for my PhD with her in mind. And then when I got in, that's when I really started digging. And that's when the connection between me and her became more than just a student looking for something interesting. That's when she started popping up in my life.
Now, you told me a story in a garden.
Yes.
Tell me, I think the viewers would be interested in hearing that story.
Yes. So the first time that I had a really powerful meeting with her, because I had never known of her as a child, which is interesting. So it wasn't like she had shown up in my life all the time and things. So I came to her quite late, to be honest. And so my mother and I were on a 6-week vacation. We went to Italy, Greece, and Turkey. And on our last day in Italy, or our last day in Rome, we went for dinner, like a shrub maze. And so I was filming, taking pictures, and I went into the maze, and I thought, oh, let's see. And so as I'm walking to the maze, I got a little bit lost because the shrubs were quite high. And I turn around, and there she is at the end of the garden, right on a wall.
So when you say she, you mean Artemis?
Artemis of Ephesus.
And was it a fresco, a painting?
It was a fountain.
A fountain.
A sculpture.
Okay.
So interestingly, Artemis of Ephesus has this coat, which I think are beehives, but anyways, Italian artists like to make them into breasts. So it was on the wall, and the water was coming out of her breasts.
Yeah.
And so as I stumbled and I saw her, I thought, oh my God, like, oh my God. I even said to her, I remember, what are you doing here?
Yes,
Right?
a Greek goddess in a bishop's garden.
Yes.
But there we
Yes.
are. And so,
Yes.
so what happened?
So I had this moment where I just felt like she was literally saying to me, like, see me. I am everywhere and I am in the unexpected. Right? And so I knew, for me it was this, I was writing my PhD at the time, and for me it was a real sign that this is the work that I have to do. This is the work that I have to put in. And I sat there for a while staring at her, just in awe, because she was so outside of what everything else was in this garden, so unexpected, and kind of hidden in this maze, you know. And so that was the first time.
Was that a turning point? Was it a deepening point?
Yeah, it was a commitment.
It was a commitment.
It was a commitment because, you know, the PhD takes so long. And, you know, I was working while I was doing the PhD, and I was raising children, and there were moments where and on this vacation with my mother, I was really, you know, my kids were 6 and 7 or something like that, 7 and 8. And it was really a break because I was feeling a bit of the burnout. And I was thinking, should I do something else? You know, should I do another career? Is this going to be worth it? Am I alone in this research with Artemis? Because no one else was quite as enthusiastic about it as I was. My committee was like, yeah, this is good, but you know, they're not into.
So she became your companion.
And she really, and on that trip, there were several moments where she would show up. This one was the first and most powerful, but then in Greece too, I bumped into her in several places where I wasn't expecting her. And so I really felt like she was really making it very clear that the commitment is worth it. That the commitment,
it's, you know, it's so wonderful to have passion in our lives.
Yes.
And to have passion in our work. And that's not always the case.
Yes.
So it shows, you know, that excitement, it helps enliven the people who we're speaking with, you know, and we're sharing information with.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I noticed in you. You had, you know, I would have called it a sparkle when I met you, and now I can say it was a sparkle of Artemis, you know? So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it was a great moment. It was it really pushed me, and it gave me that sort of, okay, I can do this, and I should do this. And
it was interesting for me because I've listened to you now speak to a couple of groups about Artemis, and I notice how she seems to hold within her so much of the independence of the more ancient form of goddess that we think of in terms of Gaia, or in terms of that sense of a powerful, enlivened, independent figure, creative figure. And so tell me how that, it seems to me that as I read your book, that you have pathed through this particular goddess elements of the great goddess archetype that I don't see, as a lay person, I don't see as strongly in some of the other gods and goddess archetypes that are around, whether it's Greek or Roman or some of the other traditions. So how that some of that comes with her independence, her solitariness, but tell me about that thread, because it surprised me.
Right. So I always call Artemis a complete goddess, like a fully evolved and encompassed divinity. And by that I mean that she was able to keep her heritage, that she was able to keep her fierceness, her softness, that she was basically not cut up into pieces and sort of given these duties. And so she is a goddess that has no responsibilities, in the sense of, like, she's not given a job. Although she is sometimes, in Greece, of course, she's the goddess of the wild, the goddess of the animals, things like that. But this is a choice for her, right? This is something she chooses. At the same time, she is able to continue carrying her ancestral line, so the mistress of animals, some of the Egyptian goddesses, the goddesses that she picks up along the way as she goes through the Mediterranean and the Middle East. And she is able to embody those goddesses depending on where she goes. And so I think that she is the only, I dare say the only goddess. I haven't had anyone say. Last night I had a conversation where someone said Kybele is the mother of the gods, and she lasts from prehistoric times to Roman times. And my response to that was, as mother, though. You see what I mean?
Okay.
As mother, which is true.
Okay.
Very powerful divinity. Very important goddess, but the role is mother. There is no other role. It's like nourishing from mother, loving from mother, protecting from mother. And it's wonderful, but it's not the only experience of women.
So you would argue then that some of the other attributes of Artemis, such as the fierceness and the willingness to dole out consequences, are attributes that don't show up,
That's right.
that she keeps.
That's right.
So as a feminine deity.
That's right. That she embodies the complexity of the female experience, right? So that she, and it's interesting because she can be mother because she's the goddess of childbirth, but she's not tied to mother.
Yeah.
Right? Like she doesn't have to raise those children, although she does protect them. And that she plays with animals. She's got cats and dogs and deers. She has girlfriends, companions. She roams, she dances, she dresses like she likes. She's the only goddess that wears a short skirt. So, and she protects and completes. She has sanctuaries that are inviolable.
So, do you think then that the other goddesses, when they were sort of given various duties as they've evolved through time, does that the flip side of this almost argues that they've been diminished from their wholeness?
Yes, absolutely they have. Absolutely, and there's a long school of thought among scholars, particularly feminist scholars, that argue that they were powerful pre-Greek times, pre-civilized times, and as the Greeks established themselves, they were married off. And they became shadows of their original selves. So Aphrodite, for example, who was a very powerful primordial goddess, becomes the goddess of sex and love, like woohoo. Athena, who is the goddess of wisdom and knowledge and secret knowledge, becomes the goddess of war. Yay. Right? Demeter is, of course, only the mother. Hera, very powerful parthenogenetic divinity, becomes the nagging wife. So Artemis is the only one, right? She's given Apollo as a twin brother, but that's more in his favor, in the sense like he gains more from that than she does. She doesn't do anything with him. She doesn't owe him anything. He doesn't tell her what to do. Like it's not a relationship like that. And so nothing is actually taken away from Artemis when she's twinned with Apollo. Nothing. So she gets to remain all of the primordial goddesses that she absorbs and gets to make it through time, and becomes Diana, of course, in the Roman times. Then she becomes the goddess of the witches. So she continues to be celebrated and survive in her true form, adapted, give or take, but not by patriarchy per se, but adapted nonetheless, all the way until the modern period, where today there are Dianic temples of women. So
and certainly beautiful ancient statues, and that stood out for me too when I was traveling in Greece and we crossed paths, and the number of temples to Artemis throughout the Mediterranean. So that's a disproportionate amount. Would that be fair to say?
Yes,
or
it's I mean, I think Athena and Aphrodite also have lots of temples, but it's because they were very much created by patriarchy. So of course Athena, the goddess of men, is going to have lots of temples. But even in Athena's temples, for example, at the Parthenon, the Acropolis, there is a temple to Artemis near the stairs, but no one goes to it. No one knows it's there, right? And this was a temple to Athena, and Artemis has a space there. So again, really surprising. At the Temple of Zeus in Athens, right across the street, there's a temple of Artemis that right now they're just digging up. When I went on the same trip with my mother, I went to the temple of Asclepius in Epidaurus. And as I walked in, I'm looking around, and Asclepius is a god of healing, and I turn around and there's a temple of Artemis.
So how she was celebrated in those times was different, because we do, she does sort of get second tier in common today, and as we think about God, if we think about gods from that time, gods and goddesses from that time.
Yeah.
What I find interesting also, and surprised me as I read through your book, was how you have traced Artemis so strongly through her pre-Greek times. So you have brought forward the characteristics that were dominant in deities from different cultures around the Mediterranean,
Yes.
and argued that this is all the same deity that's being referenced. Would that be fair to say?
Yes. And
Okay.
one of the easiest connections to do that for Artemis is because she carries weapons.
Uh-huh.
And those weapons, like the double axe, for example, are Minoan weapons and pre-Minoan weapons.
Uh-huh.
And they're also Egyptian weapons, like Neith also carries the double axe. So weapons is the one way that I connect her, and names. So like the Queen of Heaven, the Mistress of Animals, the Goddess of Childbirth, that's another one, and Child Protection, that's another one that you could see sort of traced, because every culture has a Goddess of Childbirth and a Goddess of Fertility. So there are ways to trace, very rich ways to trace her down the path. And of course, as we enter the Greek period, the Greeks try to narrow her down to just hunting with a bow and arrow. That's their representation. But huntress, I mean, sometimes she carries a sword, sometimes she carries a spear. So huntress is an interesting term because she can carry any. So that allows her to bring that history with her, right? Yeah. And so she gets to carry that.
I love that. As I read through it, I found myself inspired by the sense of the fullness of the character.
Yes, that's
So
a good word.
It was as if in Artemis you had all you needed.
Yes.
Yes. You didn't need to sort of say, well, I'd like a little bit of this deity, a little bit of that deity. I want to adapt. If we think of them as archetypes, I want to adapt some of this energy or that. But there was a roundedness and a fullness in this character that I was not aware of before.
Yes. Well, I'm glad because that makes me feel like I did my job in service to her. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right that you're right. If you want protection for your children, you go to her. But if you want protection as an independent woman, you go to her. If you have a minute where you're like, I just want to break free, right? You go to her. If you're walking in nature, you go. So you're absolutely right. In fact, I can't think of a thing that you could not go to her for in a woman's life, that you might need. So yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a fullness and there's a kindness to her. Although she's fierce, the other goddesses are always depicted during the Greek period as very petty. Right? So they're always kind of competing with each other, or they don't like certain women and they're very petty. Artemis is swift sometimes, is quite swift, it's a good word, with some of her companions, but not particularly out of like a pettiness, right? She does get upset if you make a commitment to her and you don't keep it.
Yes,
she does get upset for that. She does get upset if you offend her mother. She does get upset for different things. But not out of petty or shallowness or gossipiness, that kind of stuff.
I liked that too. I liked the unapologetic strength that because I feel that perhaps it's true, for this, we've had many generations of women who have been under the patriarchy who are reclaiming sort of a sense of not needing to be apologetic about their feelings, viewpoints, presence. And there is a strength in Artemis that feels like it's never apologized. So it's never actually had to go through regaining its independence.
Yes.
And whereas most of us today who are, perhaps it's true for all women living today, we are still having to, within the patriarchal system, sort out who we are, what we are, how we will be. And it feels as if she has never lost that.
Yes.
And that is a delight to read.
Yeah. In the hymn of Callimachus, in the hymn to Artemis, where she sits on Zeus's lap and says, I want this many nymphs and I want this many cities, and I want to be the goddess of the wild, and I want to be a virgin forever, which really just means I never want to get married. And Zeus grants all her wishes. We can see from right there that...
And she's a child.
And she's a child, supposedly.
She's just a
at this
little
point.
girl.
Yeah,
at this
she's
point.
just sitting on his lap and saying, "This is how I'm mapping my life. This is what I want." And he doesn't even bat an eye. He goes, "Okay, yeah, this is for you." But the fact that she has manifested that independence for herself, so it wasn't given to her per se. I mean, yes, Zeus is supposed to say yes. Okay, of course, her daughter, of course. But she has this plan, and I can't even imagine Zeus saying, "No, I don't think so," because you know that wouldn't be an option. So yeah, I think you're right. I think that she really encompasses women's experiences whenever they need her, at whatever stage in life they are.
And it's nice to have someone like you who is making that available. Have sort of decided that this is what you'd like to spend your time, dedicate your life to make that information available so that it's accessible. Yeah,
it is a passion. I mean, it's something that I can't help and that I love talking about, as you know, over and over again. And also it's interesting because I really love to see how women respond to her. And even for myself, like when we've had a couple of those workshops, women will say certain things and I'll be like, "Oh, that's really good." So they get to really sort of digest and embody her and experience her and go, "Oh, this is what this feels like." And I think she really fits all the different aspects. So yeah, it feels good. It feels like confirmation that
she's certainly a goddess for this time.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
She's,
Yes. Yeah. And it is a time that we need her again.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you were able to join me for a few minutes today. We've had so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And I really look forward. You've got another book that you're starting.
I do. I'm working on Artemis of Ephesus. So this is in Turkey. And that whole worship there will be really fascinating as well. Yeah, lots to say about that one.
So you'll come back?
Yes.